Hello and welcome to another video. And first of all, I want to say sorry that my notifications didn't go out on Tuesday's video. I put them as a scheduled upload, and YouTube decided not to put out the notifications for most people. Some people got them, but most of you didn't. So at the moment we've got about 1,000 of my subscribers have hit the bell, so you'll get notified when that video goes out, and that didn't happen. So I apologise for that, but that was YouTube. And again, thank you for the people that messaged me on Instagram and asked for a monk. There's quite a lot of people. I've picked 5 or 6 at the moment, and I'm going to get those ones out, and then I'm going to see what I can do after that. So first of all, I've got to see how much these are going to cost to send. They're light, it shouldn't cost that much, but I might have to put them inside Pringle tubes or something like that so you can get them without them all being broken. But again, thank you. The response to that was incredible. So yeah, hopefully as the videos go along, and if you want to support me doing this sort of stuff, the easiest way to do that is to join up on a membership, and that really does help me run the channel and grow the channel as fast as I can so I can do more stuff. But today and the next couple of videos, it may be the next 3 videos, are going to have a little bit of a theme. They're roughly around the same area, and once the videos all come together, now it may be this one and I may fit it all into the one after that, so it'll be covered in 2 videos, or it may be this video something different than the second part. But these videos are completely separate, but this one will today is something that I've been working on for 3 years. It's nothing mega special. It's just taken 3 years for me and the other guy that involved in this story to get together and agree that I can do it and how he wants me to do it and what I can say and what I can't say. But yeah, hopefully. But this one is set in Warley. So Warley is just outside Brentwood in Essex, and I guess you'll probably know Warley mainly for the old asylum. So this was what I used to call the lunatic asylum, and you know, that is, the building is stunning, but this is outside of that area, not far, but we'll get into that in a second. So the easiest way for me to start this video is to just read through some of the past events. So in 2018 I received an email that said, "Hi, my name is Julian. We last spoke in 2009. I live in Warley. We did plan for you and your team to come and do an investigation at our home, but due to my own circumstances it never happened. Do you still do investigations? If so, could you please possibly arrange one here?" And I did reply to that, and we tried to sort something out. I wasn't really doing the investigations how I used to do them, and I was about to start running as a local councillor. Not that that would put people off voting for me or anything like that. It was just my time was really short. We agreed that nothing was really going to happen. I did pass him on to some mediums that maybe I could go around and have a chat with him. Then in 2022, see, he's put, "Hi Shane, I've seen you've been making videos on YouTube. Feel free to use my story but change the location." Well, I've already told you it's in Warley, so things have progressed since then. Since then, we've been trying to get it together that we can tell you this story without identifying exactly the house. And it's a little bit complicated, so I've got to change a little few things about it. It's 50-50 if you want people to know the house anyway. So if you do know it, this story has been told locally and around Brentwood. So I know some people who know Julian know this situation and have laughed about it. Some have scared by it. So, but basically we're going to get into it, and I'll tell you how we first come about. So in 2009, Julian contacted me about a situation that was going on with some land that he had bought and was currently building a house on. In fact, the house had been well built by then. It was nearly 10-year-old since he had started doing it. But he wanted to find out about the history of the area, and if my mediums could come in and clear any problems that were going on that site. it became very, very confusing, and things were getting in the way. We were trying to arrange to do stuff, and yeah, it never really happened. After that, and especially in the last few years, Julian has been emailing me, and we've been trying to sort out what we can do, and we've agreed that I'm not going to go and film at the location, and he doesn't really want the house on there, but then he was going to have the house on there. But Julian's decided that he's not going to do that, and he's somewhere I can say what I like about him on here. But Julian started off working in London. Now, Julian reckons that he was one of the original yuppie boys, and he doesn't mind being described like that, but he said he was a little bit of an arrogant so-and-so back then. And he was, everything is the time is money. No, he classed himself as like a Del Boy type yuppie when you see that Yuppie Love episode. So that's how he described himself, walking around with the big mobile phones and all that sort of stuff, and everything was an inconvenience to him if it wasn't about him. And he openly admits that. That's what sort of person he was like back then. I asked Julian to make me some notes that I could refer back to, and one of the notes he's put on here, the land has been in my family for around 20 years. No one had got around to doing anything with it. It had already had planning permission on it because the house was previously there beforehand. I personally took over the land in 1996 and started to get things going right away, as the year before I'd got married and we was now expecting a baby. So things were developing quite quick on this land. Now, what I'll say is that the house doesn't really stand out on the road. So if you go down here, the house is slightly set back. The houses around it are a lot older. His house is very nice, but at the time, this was just a plot of land. Nothing had been built on it for around about 70 years. And the rumour had been that the house that had been there before had burnt down, and no one ever wanted to build back on that land. This sort of plays into the strange events that went on. What Julian explains is that in 1996, he started putting down the foundations for that land. He'd been clearing it. Now, during the clearance and flattening of that land, some weird things happened, like machinery breaking down, and some injuries had happened on there. Now, he, again, being a yuppie, he wasn't really doing the work himself. He had contractors going there doing it all, and as Julian said, he was just throwing money at the situation, hoping that it was going to fasten it up and sort out any problems that happened. So anything that went wrong, he'd just throw more money at it and hope the problems would go away. They laid the first part of the concrete foundations on one side of the building. Now, this was meant to be where they were going to originally start building like a driveway, so it was for the vehicles that were coming onto the plot to be able to park on solidly. Just where the house was going to be sitting, they were removing some what they thought were stones and slabs and all this, and they crashed down into a hole, the cellar. So on the plans that they had of the really old building, there was no cellar on there. And when I'd done the land survey 20 years ago, when the land came into his family's hands, nothing was said about a cellar there. So this taken them all by shock. This was also a little bit creepy for Julian. So at the weekend, he went up there to view the land. And he's standing there and they're going, well, what do you want us to do? We can fill it in, or we can add it into the drawings. Julian decided, you know what? We've got a cellar. If we can build the foundations around it, and then we'll have the cellar as part of the plans. So that caused a bit of a 6-month delay in getting new plans drawn up. The time was cracking on. We actually moved into 1997 now, and already his wife Francesca was getting very, very big, and with the baby, yeah. So she was about to give birth. It wasn't a personal attack. And she was getting very, very big, ready to give birth. The land had moved on a little bit. They'd sorted the cellar out and they were laying foundations over the top of the cellar, and something weird started to happen. The concrete would not set. No matter how often they'd done this, the concrete there would not set. So Julian said that the first time they laid the concrete, they said it was too wet and they had to wait a longer period for it to dry. It never dried, and in fact, the day they gave up on it, it was bubbling and it was getting warm, and they couldn't work this out. So this had been sitting there for 4 days now and there was no sign of this concrete setting. They decided that they were going to scrape back the top layer, put a slightly dry mix on top, and to see if that was going to set, and that didn't set. They had to scrap the whole lot, so they come in and it delayed the project a little bit longer. They scrapped all that concrete on top, scraped it all off, and they had to dig a little bit out, but generally it was just scraping it off because it hadn't set. They poured the next lot of concrete on, and immediately, instead of it getting warm or start setting, it become icy cold. This comes back into play a little bit later on. After a couple of weeks, the concrete had actually set to a good standard, but they were still puzzled why this concrete went icy cold when they laid it. I keep looking back and cutting on this. I'm referring to his notes because if it wasn't for his notes it's written for me, I would be completely lost on this one, because there was a lot to get into before. Well, no, the concrete not setting, all that is a part of what the weird stuff was going on. But eventually the building started going up. What Julian said is that some of the workers on the project weren't happy working there, and they said that every time they come to that site they got ill and they felt like they had the flu, or they got sicky bugs, so they started saying that the land was cursed. This highlights something that Julian's family were told a long time ago. Julian's dad picked up the land about 20 odd years ago. He got it for a very, very cheap price, and he wasn't sure why. He knew that the lunatic asylum was up the road, but all this sort of stuff was all being planning to be demolished and changed around, and Warley is a really lovely place, and you'll see that in my next videos coming up, a bit of a clue where I'm going. When he was there looking at the land and they started doing a little bit of fencing around it to protect it, some local residents come past and went, "Oh, good luck buying that bit of land, like it's cursed, it's jinxed." And Julian said that when his dad asked the neighbours about it and all that, they turned around and pointed to a old historian that lived in Brentwood and said that you need to have a chat with him about what went on in that area. It does come back to things like witches, the witch trials, and I don't really want to tread on all this because I want to cover it more in the later videos. This particular house that sits on the land that they now own was apparently belonging to a lady that was accused of witchcraft. This sort of digs into the events that I'm about to tell you about. Again, we've got this thing where Julian's work crew are not very well and the job is getting delayed. Julian's son is now born, and Julian's son is Stephen. He's now 28. He's born in 1997, and they were expecting actually to be in that house by the end of the year. But unfortunately, it looked like it weren't going to be till 1998, early 1998, that the house was ready for them to go into. And yeah, sure enough, the house was ready for them to move into in early 1998. In fact, it was in April 1998. So that was the day they moved in. Julian said from the day they moved in, things started getting very, very weird. Just looking through my notes that Julian sent me, he's put on here, "Do you remember, Shane, I asked you if new builds can be haunted?" So this is sort of the question that we're looking at today. This is a new build. Well, clearly there's something going on with the land that the house has been built on. So Julian's son was coming up to 1 year old. He was just learning to walk properly and to form a few words or sounds. Julian and Francesca are in their living room part of the building, and their son is in the high chair, and their son starts getting very, very scared and starts crying. As almost a 1 year old, he's not really like communicating or that sort of stuff properly with them, but they could see that he had a terrified look on his face. They're going up to him going, what's wrong? Francis takes, I keep saying Francesca Francis, apart from him writing the name down. I've already known her as Frances, so I'm going to refer to her as Frances. Frances takes Stephen out and she's hugging him, and he is clinging on to her, and she said that he was pulling onto her so tight that she was actually in pain where he was gripping, and she's trying to put him back off, and Julian comes over and he tries to take him off, and he said he was like stuck to her like a leech, and he pulls him off, and the kid is just screaming the house down, and all the boy keeps doing is pointing up at the ceiling. Now they're looking around, they can't see anything around or anything bizarre, so they just think he's having the screaming abdabs. Julian and Frances decide that they're going to take him up to bed. Maybe he'll settle upstairs, and he does. They get him up there, and he is sound out in his cot. They come back down. Now, baby monitors back then, I guess my daughter was born mid-2000s, so I know that the baby monitors and the Tommy ones used to have the cameras on there. This didn't. This only recorded the sound, so if you're downstairs you'd only get the sound coming through. They're sitting there and they're watching telly, and they've got the little baby monitor next to them, and they could hear him mumble a few times and all that sort of stuff. Then they start hearing the voice of a woman coming over on the speaker. Straight away, Frances runs upstairs, bursts through the door. Obviously, there's no one there. Julian's going, it's obviously interference on the baby monitor, which you get a lot of, and this has appeared in, I think, a couple of my stories before. Baby monitors not really working well and getting cross-feeding, and people hearing people down the street on stuff and all that. But while they're up there, the speaker is working fine, and Frances stays up there and she sits up there for an hour, and all the time that she is up there, nothing's coming over weird on the baby monitor downstairs. Then Frances comes back downstairs, they're sitting there, and within 3 minutes of her sitting down, again they hear a slight singing noise coming through the monitor. They did have a little musical thing in there to help the son sleep, but this was a person singing to Stephen and using Stephen's name, which really freaked them out. This time they've both gone up there, and of course there's nothing going on. And right now, if you do happen to hear children's voices in the back of this video, it's because my daughter has her friend having a sleepover and they won't shut up. So I do apologise. But yeah, getting back to this. So they went up there and nobody was in there. The next day, Julian actually takes the baby monitor back and buys a different baby monitor. He comes back, they set it up. The same thing happens that night. Now, eventually, what actually happens to solve this situation, Frances goes to bed at the same time as Stephen goes to bed and sleeps in his room with him. And this went on for about 6-7 months. So Julian says around the same time that the baby monitor was playing up, he had decided that he was going to make the cellar that they did keep and turn it into a gym. And he was going out buying all the gym equipment, and he'd gone down there, and what he wanted to do was to put a rubber matting on the floor down there. And so that's what he went off and done. He got the rubber matting, he laid the floor down there, and the gym equipment was about to be delivered. The morning he gets up for delivery of the gym equipment, he goes downstairs, goes into the cellar to move things just away so he can make easy access to get stuff down there. And he opens it up, and he said it was like an ice box. Now, some of the stuff we already had down there, like the running machine, he said had frost on it. And the rubber mats, he said, were icy. Yeah, this was in the summer. You do get a temperature difference in a cellar, but not where it generates ice, and not in the summer. This sort of like freaked Julian out. He wasn't sure what was going on. He spoke to a few people, and they were coming up with some weird explanations, like, oh, maybe there's a culvert that runs underneath it, or all this sort of stuff they was coming up with to try and explain something that is really unexplainable. Even more so, the day after, Julian had put all the gym equipment in. He got up in the morning, went down, and he said the cellar was so hot he couldn't do nothing in there. He said the temperature was scorching, And over the next few months, he got fans, he got air conditioning now. And he said it was generally like this for about 3-4 years, where the temperature in that room would change so quick day after day that he could never keep on top of it. So in February 2000, Julian and Francis welcomed their daughter, and her name and the name they gave her was Florence. Bit like what happened with Stephen. When Florence was a few months old, they are in the living room and they're giving her a cuddle. She starts freaking out at something above the ceiling. At the same time, Stephen, who now talks, turned around and said, "That woman's after her." And they're like, "What?" And he goes, the woman. And he points up to the ceiling. "Do you mean what woman?" He goes, the woman that's always here." And they're looking at this 3-year-old kid and going, "Stephen, explain yourself." He goes, "The woman that she's always comes into the house." He goes, "I've told you before about her." And they're sitting there thinking, "Is he?" And Julian goes, "Well, yeah, from time to time he'd say something about this woman, but we just thought it was one of the neighbours you've seen outside the windows, and we didn't put nothing to it." But Florence was petrified. This little baby, he's not much more than a newborn. He's been traumatised by something that is in that room. This is when they first called a medium to come to their house, and I'm not too sure who the medium was. I probably knew the name back then, but they turned up and they told them a lot of weird stuff about the house. None of it that now Julian believes. He doesn't believe it. All that stuff he was told then was made up, apart from one bit. And that's the bit when, just as the medium was about to leave, he turned around and said that he was picking up a lady that had lost her life in a fire in that building. Well, we know this was a new build, so maybe he was referring to the building that was there before that, and this building before that had burnt down. If he's a local medium and he was going to that address, he possibly could look up the history, say he had something to say, and to try and convince them that he was right. Not that I poo-poo all mediums, but we know this stuff goes on, and there are sort of these fakes and phonies out there that do it. And some people believe that all mediums are like that, and but this is how it goes. I know Julian, he wanted to believe the mediums. His wife Frances was literally dismissed everything that they said right from day one. She didn't want the mediums there, and they was against it. She thought that the mediums were actually going to bring more bad energy to that building that was already there. This is where for Julian things started getting more serious. He was doing really well at work. He worked at a broker's in London, and as I say, he was an original yuppie, and he was making a lot of money. And the house was having an extension on it, and it's now a massive house. I will say they still live there, so it gives you a bit of an outcome of this story early on. But the house was beginning to grow in size and was looking more and more stunning. Unfortunately for Julian, he was suffering from bad health, and it seemed that every time he was in that house, he felt like he had the flu or he couldn't sleep, and this was causing tension between him and Francis. So much so that he actually spent a period away from the house for a couple of weeks, just to try and prove to his wife that it was the house that was making him ill or whatever. And it did. Being away from the house improved his health. And funny enough, not long ago, I was convinced I was allergic to something in this house because I had an allergic reaction, and I turned and said to my wife, I'm going to move out for 6 weeks to see if I get better. And so I appreciate where he was coming from. That when you feel that you can't get yourself better and you're convinced that it's something in the environment you're in that's triggering it, you try to remove yourself from that environment. So Julian notes that August 2000, it was so hot in Warley, I felt like there's no air. The coolest place in our house happened to be the cellar. I found myself spending more and more time in the cellar. The air conditioning down there was a godsend. It's the best investment I'd ever made. Then Julian says this: the last week of August, I was down in the cellar, I was on my treadmill. I'd been going for about half an hour when all of a sudden I felt like my feet were sinking. I looked down and the treadmill was sinking through the mat and into the concrete. I pulled the mat back and the concrete was nothing but powder. It was all breaking up. Now what Julian told me, he knew that the builders had this problem with the concrete previously when they were doing the top pour. That was like the roof that went over the top of the cellar, but nothing had ever been told to him about the bottom of the cellar. Far as he knew, the flagstones down there only had a skim of concrete on top. So the original flooring of the cellar was left and they put a skim on top of that. He contacted the builder. The builders come around, they looked at the floor and someone said, there's no way this is possible. This could not have happened. Something had disintegrated all the concrete in that cellar. What the builder advises Julian was that they were going to take all the concrete out, which is no more than powder now. Take all that out and leave the flagstones at the bottom of the cellar, which probably what they should have done first of all, but that is what they did. This was okay until the end of September. Now when Julian was down there in September, he was working out on the treadmill again and he had a TV down there, so I guess like what we do these days with that pentathlon or whatever thing is, you run and you watch things. You know, back then it was the old box TVs on there and you know he was running watching television when all the power went down and he comes to a stop on the treadmill. He goes up to open the door of the cellar and the cellar door is stuck. He's now in pitch darkness down the cellar. He hears a laugh behind him. This is the first time that Stephen has actually heard something that wasn't from the baby monitor or the kids pointing things out. He heard a woman's laugh directly behind him in that cellar. Now this cellar was so dark he could not see anything. So he's fumbling around on the doors and the walls to try and get out of there. And he said this woman's laugh turned into a cackle. And he describes it like what you see on the films and TV when you describe a witch's laugh. And he said that he felt as if somebody was playing a trick on him and was making it sound more spooky than what it was. So although he was panicking, he thinks his wife may be having a little joke with him. So he starts off really not taking it seriously. Then he says there was a cold hand on his neck. He swings round with his arms and doesn't contact anything. And he said he was like, I have to use his words because I love it. I swing my arms around and I couldn't feel nothing. I was doing the windmilling in. You know, have you ever seen the advert, windmilling in for the football violence? And I do remember that advert. I'll have to try and put a copy of it. And it's a bloke where he's just windmilling into a fight. So when I read that, it did make me giggle. So he's windmilling in the cellar to see if he's going to hit anything, and he doesn't contact with nothing. There's nobody in that cellar with him. He was doing this for a couple of minutes and he said again he heard the laugh. This time it was coming from the top of the stairs where he'd just been before he went running around like a lunatic trying to hit people that weren't there. The voice was at the top of the stairs. This made him run towards the top of the stairs. As he got to the top, his wife opens up the door and asks what all the commotion was going on. She could hear him running around and shouting down in the cellar and thought something was wrong. She opens up the door. The rest of the house had complete power. It was just in the cellar that all power had lost. His wife opened up the door, and as she did so, looking down at the darkness and seeing Julian running up the stairs, the lights will come back on. So he knew it wasn't her because all the power switches were well away from where she was standing. But the treadmill started on its own, the TV turned back up, and he said his wife turned around and said that he looked like he had seen a ghost, which we always hear, don't we? And he said that he was having like a panic attack. He felt like he was so claustrophobic, stuck in that cellar, no lights on, he couldn't feel anything. This laugh that frightened the life out of him. Francis turned around and said that, could it be that the ventilation system was picking up the sound outside the house and was coming through the vents? Julian thought about it, and in his mind he was like, yeah, that's a good explanation, but in his gut and his heart he's like, no, that was weird. That was really, really weird. Now the next thing that happened wasn't witnessed by them. It was actually witnessed by the neighbour and one member of the fire brigade. So about 3 o'clock in the morning, they're woken by banging on the door and the fireman standing there. And this fireman says, we've got reports that your house is on fire. And they're going, there's no fire here. And the fireman said, well, we've got to come around because one of our officers, as we was pulling in, said he could see smoke coming out of the windows. And they go, well, sure. Well, they're a bit concerned now. Like, there's a fire in the house. The house, I say, had grown in size, so they wasn't using all those rooms. So they let the fireman go round and check all the rooms, and they couldn't find anything. They went out onto the garage area where the neighbour was standing there, and the neighbour was gobsmacked. And the neighbour said that they had come home from work, and as they were driving up, they see smoke and flames coming out of the windows of that house. And right away, they phoned the fire brigade. They said they stood there at the driveway and the fire was getting quite intense. And they was worried about the people inside. They weren't going to go in there themselves, and they were just going to wait for the fire brigade. The fire brigade turned up within a few minutes. As that neighbour looked round to see the fire engine coming down the road and looked back at the house, everything had gone. There was no smoke, there's no flames. The first officer to spot the house on the journey in said they could see smoke coming out of that house. What do you put that down to? That's bizarre. That is the part of this story that grabbed me. That did this neighbour could be playing a joke? Is he wasting fire brigade times? But yet a fireman said that they spotted smoke coming out of that house as they pulled into the street. That's something you can't make up. Julian again just went round the house again, checked everything, checked all the smoke alarms and made sure they could. No, there was no smell of smoke or anything. They couldn't find anything in there at all. Christmas 2002. Now apparently Julian goes all out on Christmas. He has to have the big real Christmas tree and really fancy decorations and everything. He is, as he said, he's not like this no more. But he said he was very, very flashy. Everything had to be proper and expensive. So his Christmas tree was quite special to him. One night they went to bed. Everything was perfectly normal. In the morning they come down. Julian's really expensive big Christmas tree looked like something out of the National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation. He said it was burnt to a crisp. Yet everything around it, all the presents, the ornaments, hadn't been touched. He said there were still ornaments on the tree that were completely fine, but the tree itself was completely like ashes and soot. He goes, it was just like charcoal. He goes, you could touch it and it would break off in your hand. How do you explain that? Spontaneous combustion? No, we've seen it with human beings, don't we? But we know what really causes that. How can a tree burn from inside and then leave everything, all the ornaments, untouched? Julian starts taking the tree apart and literally sweeping up all the ashes. He throws all the ashes outside. His wife just can't make out what the hell has gone on. Apparently I can't say that. I can't say the H-E-L-L word because YouTube don't like it. So I've said it enough in my videos, haven't I? I said it a lot. I know I swore in my last one. I didn't mean to. That's when I was in the tunnel. Yeah, that was natural. That's me being brave. So Julian being Julian, he went out and bought a replacement Christmas tree right away. As he comes back, now they've done it as a bit of a family outing, they all went out there and they got the tree, come back. As they went into the driveway, where Julian has stacked up all the ashes of the tree, they weren't ashes anymore. They were just all pine needles and broken branches. And he said it looked as if someone had just pulled a Christmas tree apart, broke it all up and just threw it on the floor and chopped it all up. He said there's nothing, didn't look burnt at all. Him and Francis were just looking at this and are like, what is going on? No, we're losing the plot. Are we imagining things? Now Julian and Francis were very, very religious, and coming to Christmas they went to the church, and this was midnight mass, and after the service they spoke to the vicar. I don't know what church this is. I should have asked Julian that, but the vicar turned around and said that maybe the house and the land needs a blessing, and he said after Christmas he'll come round and do a blessing on the house for them. Christmas went through, no more instances, nothing weird happened. The vicar came round and done a blessing on the house. This seems to be the worst thing that they could have done. From that moment on, Julian said that his house became almost unlivable. He hated going home. His wife wanted to move out. The kids were petrified, and it was things like the doors banging, the kitchen units banging, doors were opening up, doors were slamming shut. He said the windows upstairs kept opening up and nobody was up there. He said the aircon down in the cellar kept turning on to full blast. You go down there, it was icy, and then while it was pumping out in full ice mode, it was getting, the temperature in the room was getting hotter and hotter. He said he couldn't make it out. He goes, they were going out their minds with these weird things that were going on, but nothing concrete to say that this was a paranormal event. But now his wife was saying that she don't want to live there no more, and that was a lot of money that Julian has pumped into this. And as Julian says, he wasn't short of money. If it comes to the worst thing, he would move out, but this land was owned by his family and he had taken it on, and he felt that it would be a failure for him if he turned around and was all cocky. I'll take that land, I'll do this, I'll do that. If he sold that land, he could be seen as a failure in his family's eyes, so he didn't want to do that. That was the last thing he wanted to do. But from then on, even more things were happening. So the kids were waking up in the night time saying that they're hearing voices in their bedrooms. They were waking the parents up saying they don't want to sleep in there no more, and they were coming back. So we've got a little gnat flying around. They were waking the parents up, didn't want to go back into their bedrooms, and things were just getting very, very stressful. Julian said that the next thing that happened almost tipped him over the edge. They got up one morning and outside their cellar door, the ground was wet. They opened up the door and he said that the cellar was flooded up to the level of the door. He said, so that is like 8 foot of water in his cellar. That was all his stuff, all the aircon, all the gym, all completely flooded. They'd had no rain. They obviously thought that a pipe had burst somewhere in the house. They got the plumbers in, they got the fire brigade in. The fire brigade were brilliant. They pumped all the water out, and they never found a leak. They went to the planning department and had more surveys done, because they remembered what their friend said about a culvert underneath an underground stream or something like that. Could that have broken through and flooded his cellar? Nothing at all. There's nothing in there that could have filled that up with water. Now finally the insurance company put it down as an act of God, and he actually wasn't covered for this, so he had to cover the cost of all the new equipment in there and everything. But he could not wipe that out. There's no reason that cellar could have flooded. Having to think of it myself, I can't, if everything was sealed in there, and Warley, I think it's on a hill, so I don't know if the groundwater would have come up that high, so I can't really see what could have caused it myself. not as if water could seep through the walls or something like that. If they found no burst pipes, then I don't know, it hadn't been raining, and so I have no explanation that I had to offer him. I remember Dave, who was our electrician, turned around when we spoke to Dave originally about this, and Dave turned around and said that, you know, sometimes you get electrical cables, water feeds through electrical cables. Funny enough, just thinking this, Live for Tom's channel at New Year, his cellar flooded, his basement flooded, and the water come through his electrics. But again, they didn't have no rain there at Warley, so I don't know, I can't explain it. But that, he said, was one thing that really pushed him over the edge to thinking about, I'm going to get rid of the house, I've had enough, I'm just going to get rid of it all. What actually happened was that Julian had a chance to go and work in America for a year. He would come back every few months to spend 2 weeks at home and then go back again. And his wife did not want to be in that house without him. What they actually done, they rented another property for his wife to go and live with the kids, and they rented that building out to other people. They put them on a 2-year contract. What actually happened was that nobody was staying in that house any longer than a month. Something would happen, they'd call them back up and say, we don't want to be here anymore, and something's come up, we've got to go. Sorry to let you down. Some people lost money, deposits, everything, but they wanted to leave that house. This went on a few times till one family turned around and said, your house is haunted, we don't want to be here. What the family described is that one morning they come down, and standing in the kitchen was an elderly lady, and they're looking around to see if the back door was open, and the husband says, oh, what are you doing in my house? And probably not as polite as that. And the lady just looked at him, tilted her head to one side, laughed, and then disappeared in front of them. That is when they immediately phoned up and said, we don't want to live here no more. Now, Julian had nothing like that had happened to Julian, and Francis, nothing like that had happened to them. But they do know that their kids would always say about this elderly lady that was in their house. Julian went over to the bloke in Brentwood again and asked him about the previous owners. Did anyone die in the house and all that? And they couldn't find anything. They couldn't find anything about anyone dying in that fire. They do know that the family was a family of 6 that had lived in there originally, so it's quite a sizable building that are burnt down. But there's no record of any deaths there. They looked it up, they found the census reports of the people who lived there before, and yeah, but it had no deaths recorded there. What was interesting, on the census report, the oldest member of that family of 6 was an 86-year-old woman. Could this be the woman that is haunting that building or that land? No, it's this thing about, are new builds can new builds be haunted? It looks in this case it can be. Now, Julian, over the years, he come back from America. His wife decided that they were going to go in that house and they're going to move back in. She didn't like the house that they were renting. They moved back in, they cleared it all out, they gutted it all, redone it, spent a lot of money on doing stuff. They even put a sub pump back in the cellar, so just in case something would flood again, it would pump water out. So all this sort of stuff, contingency plans they had to protect the house. And then in 2008, the year before they contacted me, they had what they classed as a night from hell that ended up having the police and priests all turn up at their house. So again, I'm going to read from Julian's notes. January the 5th, 2008. It was the night from hell. We woke up 2 a.m. in the morning. The kids are screaming. We can hear a woman laughing downstairs. I open up the bedroom door and it won't open. My wife comes along and opens up the door with no issues. We make our way into our kids' room and they are standing on the bed. Stephen is in an absolute mess. He is crying and his face is as red as beetroot. Flo's on the floor screaming that he's making her sick. Francis runs to Flo, but as she gets close to her, Francis gets thrown against the wall. That's bit of a turnaround, isn't it? That's a bit of a different escalation. I try to get to her and I feel as if my feet are stuck to the ground. At the same time, I can hear the laughing of a lady in the distance. I can hear the lady calling out for Stephen, asking him to come to her. Stephen is standing on his bed, still screaming and crying. I try to grab hold of Stephen. Stephen jumps off the bed and runs past me. He's heading off to the bathroom. He gets to the bathroom, goes inside and locks the door. Julian's in complete shock. He doesn't know what to do at this stage. You got Francis that's been thrown up against the wall. You got Florence that's on the floor being screaming and being sick, and you got Stephen that's now locked himself in the bathroom. It sounds horrible. The first thing that Julian does is to break the bathroom door to get his son out, and all four of them together get into a bundle and they're just sitting there on the floor of the landing. They can hear this lady's voice downstairs calling for Stephen. Julian decides that he's going to go down and face his fears and see what is there. He comes down the stairs and the far end of the living room. Now, the way that Julian describes his house is that you go into the living area and then you've got a TV area that is on the back of that before you get to a big open plan kitchen. He says as he comes down the stairs, he sees this lady standing in the living area, and he describes her as short, bent over. Again, what you get this typical type of witch thing with his actual description of the lady. I say that she's about 80, she's bent over, she's your typical witch description. She's got a shawl over her shoulders and got a very, very ugly face. I'm not making this up. You couldn't make this up. This is the worst thing I've seen in my life. It's what affected Julian. Julian goes on to tell you that, this screaming from upstairs, the kids were carrying on, this lady laughing and calling the son's name was continuing. This has gone on for sort of half an hour. Next thing he knows, the police are banging on his door. The neighbours, these houses are not joined, these houses are quite spaced apart, have heard all this screaming going on and have called the police and turned around and said that they think that Julian is beating up the family. Now the police open up the door, they rush in. First thing they do is push him up against the wall, handcuff him, because they can hear all this crying and screaming going on upstairs. They think that this is in action going on right now. The police run through the building and they have a look round and there's nothing else there. They get the kids down and the first thing Francis sees is Julian in handcuffs up against the wall. She's shouting out to the police he hasn't done anything. At the same time, she's picking the phone up. She's phoning the church. She's phoning the vicar. You got to remember, this is like the middle of the night. Phoning the vicar, telling her that the house is possessed and that all the police are there and everything. The vicar turns up and goes over the police what has gone on before, and the police don't know what to make of it. They're like completely puzzled. They said, look, we just come here, we got reports that there's domestic going on and that is all we can deal with. They were happy there was no domestic situation going on. They let Julian go. The kids were still in a mess, but the vicar priest being there, calmed them down. The priest contacted someone else. They come over, so you end up having two priests at the house, and they stayed there till 8 o'clock in the morning. They agreed that they were going to help the family. They got a few people together. They done a service in the house. They done a full blessing in the house, and it does seem to have worked. Julian says that he has not really had any more instances in that house. His wife did move out for a bit with the kids, and they felt a little bit difficult to go back in there, but after 6 months they've gone back in and everything has been absolutely perfect. Julian does say that things like doors slamming, they do hear footsteps. The son, who is now 20 odd, turned around and said that from time to time he is sure he hears a lady laughing in that house when no one is in there. And Flo is still convinced the house is haunted. and she doesn't like being in the house on her own. And say, I would like Julian to let me go around and film the house. I don't think that you'd really want to do something like that. If I know Frances, so she was the first one to bring up getting help, but at the same time she didn't want to bring mediums in there in case it brought bad energy. If we were going to go around there and do an investigation, or a team was going to go down and do an investigation, she probably would think that they could restart something. Now, it was a trauma that she had gone through. This sort of links into what we're going to be talking about in the future, because there could be a slight different explanation for this, but I don't want to ruin it for the next videos coming up. As I say, they're not about this location, they are about about this building, they are about Warley. So my next video is going to be about Warley, or maybe not the next one, the one after that might be about Warley. But again, thank you for everything you're doing for me to help me grow my channel. Yeah, I love your comments. Yes, I don't know why my channel isn't growing as much as it can be. I'm probably just way too ugly for people to want to subscribe to me, especially if you watch me on a big television or something like that. But I did plan to do one on Dover. It didn't go well. Went there yesterday. Gale force winds, rain. It didn't go well. I didn't film. I will put a few little clips in here and some photos, but you'll see it wasn't the weather to film the stories I wanted to film. What I'm trying to do is I've gone down a bit of a rabbit hole with smugglers. So I've got all these stories about smugglers along the south coast, and literally from like Ramsgate right the way down to Hastings, and then there's a load more from like Portsmouth, Southampton, Plymouth and all that. But I want to do one video, maybe two videos covering them, because they're fascinating, and there's something about the old pirates and smugglers that intrigue me. And yeah, so I may do it, I may not do it, depends. It was a long drive down to Dover for nothing, I tell you, but my daughter enjoyed the drive. But yeah, it wasn't the pleasantest ones in that wind, but I'm waffling on again. But yeah, hope you enjoy the nuns when you get them. I hope you enjoy the monks when you get them. And did I call them nuns at the beginning? I might have done, didn't I? But no, I hope you enjoyed the monks when you get them, and I'll try and do some more. I've got loads of names on the Instagram now, and I couldn't give everyone on there to reply to me, but thank you. Share the videos, like it, everything you do normally, and thank you for your support, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.